Adolf Frederick of Sweden had one job: keep the kingdom running, look regal, don't die stupidly. He nailed 2 out of 3. In February 1771, the king sat down to a meal his physicians had specifically asked him to skip. Heart condition, they said very politely, as one does with kings. He ordered lobster anyway, then caviar, then herring, then champagne. You can probably see where this is going. The semla buns arrived in 14 individual servings, soaked in hot milk, because apparently moderation was for peasants. Sweden would need a new king by morning. The buns were reportedly excellent, too full to rule. Adolf Frederick had been king of Sweden since 1751, which is a long time to be a figurehead. The Swedish parliament handled the actual governing, wars, treaties, the serious paperwork, while Adolf sat at the top of the org chart looking appropriately regal. He was decent at it, ceremonial, calm, not especially controversial. His reign would not go down in the history books for much, except the one thing. His physicians had been watching him with increasing concern for some time. The king's heart was not what it had been. Lay off the rich food, they said. Take it easy on the feasting. Your Majesty, we are being very literal right now. Adolf nodded in the way people nod when they have absolutely no intention of complying. Your Majesty, perhaps we skip the lobster this evening. I am skipping nothing. The physician recommends... The physician may see himself out. February 12th, 1771. Adolf Frederick sat down for dinner. The menu featured lobster, caviar, herring, smoked meats, champagne, and sauerkraut, because apparently the man had the caloric ambitions of someone who had never once considered consequence. He worked through the courses with complete commitment. The physician's warnings presumably echoed somewhere in the background, very quietly. Then the semla arrived. A semla is a traditional Swedish pastry, a soft wheat bun filled with almond paste and whipped cream, usually eaten once a year at the start of Lent. It is, by all accounts, delicious. It is not, by any reasonable account, meant to be eaten 14 times in a single sitting, drowned in bowls of hot milk. Adolf Frederick ate 14 of them. He died later that evening of what his doctors diplomatically described as digestive problems, which is the politest possible way to say that a king ate himself to death on dessert. He was 60 years old. Sturzer had survived 2 decades on the throne and was finally undone by his own enthusiasm for buns. The Swedes still call semla the cake that killed a king. He would have liked that, probably. The crown passed to his son, Gustav III, who would go on to have a considerably more dramatic death, shot at a masked ball, died 12 days later. But that is a story for another time. The point here is that Adolf Frederick set a standard, not for governance, for the specific and underappreciated category of royal death that makes historians put down their coffee and check the source twice. He was not alone in that category, not even slightly. The porcelain throne king George II of Great Britain was, by most measures, a competent and serious monarch. He commanded his troops in person at the Battle of Dettingen in 1743, making him the last British king to personally lead soldiers into combat. His reign lasted 33 years. He oversaw the expansion of the British Empire across multiple continents and navigated his kingdom through 2 Jacobite uprisings without flinching. He was not a man who did things timidly or without purpose. On the morning of October 25th, 1760, King George II woke up, drank his morning chocolate, and went to use the bathroom. This is, in fairness, the kind of morning routine that has ended many careers. In George's case, it ended considerably more than that. His valet heard a loud thud from behind the closed door. Upon entering, he found the king on the floor. George had risen too quickly from his toilet seat, which caused an aortic aneurysm to rupture. He was dead before a doctor could be summoned. His valet, standing in the doorway, is said to have stared for a full moment before finding his feet. Is the king all right? Difficult to say. What happened? He stood up. The man who had personally led a cavalry charge against the French army was finished off by standing up too fast. There is something almost instructive about that. Survive your enemies, survive the politics, survive 3 full decades of running an empire, then lose to a Tuesday morning. Official royal activities are far more lethal than anyone puts on the brochure. His valet reportedly described the aftermath with tremendous composure. The palace doctor was called. Protocols were followed. The monarchy continued. As it does. Kings fall, paperwork keeps moving. George II was buried at Westminster Abbey with full ceremony, which he absolutely deserved. None of the ceremony mentioned the bathroom. History is occasionally tactful, so we have established 2 things. Kings can eat themselves to death on pastry, and kings can also be eliminated by the basic physics of getting off a chair. Official royal duties, dining, resting, the morning routine, turn out to be significantly more lethal than advertised. The roster of monarchs done in by completely mundane circumstances is long, distinguished, and almost entirely undignified. Which brings us naturally to the question of your own ancestors and what embarrassing circumstances may or may not have ended their particular branch of the family tree. The royals aren't the only ones with humiliating history. They're just the ones with better documentation. Today's video is brought to you by MyHeritage, the #1 online genealogy platform, and, I would argue, an essential tool for anyone who has ever wondered whether poor decision-making runs in the family. No spitting into a government envelope, no DNA logged for cloning purposes, just real historical records, over 18 billion of them, cross-referenced against your family name and date of birth to surface results you didn't know were waiting. Their Instant Discoveries feature does the heavy lifting on your behalf. You drop in some basic information, and MyHeritage flags records you didn't know existed, then connects them directly to people in your tree. I used it myself, skeptically, and discovered that a great-great-grandfather of mine had spent his career as a chandler, which is a candle maker, which explains absolutely nothing about me but is exactly the kind of detail I didn't know I needed. MyHeritage also lets you colorize and animate old photographs of deceased relatives, which is either genuinely moving or mildly unsettling, depending entirely on your relationship with the concept of the undead. If you happen to discover a great-uncle who accidentally started a fire, or a grandmother who once bet on a horse and lost, report back. Use the link below to get your free 14-day trial and start finding out what your people were actually up to. The last laugh. Martin I of Aragon was the final king of the House of Barcelona, which had ruled the crown of Aragon since the 12th century. 300 years of dynasty, ending with Martin. He was not a bad king. Reasonably competent, kept things together, managed the usual medieval chaos with adequate composure. His bigger problem, in the spring of 1410, was that he was very ill. Digestion had turned against him in a serious and committed way. His physicians had him resting, limiting food, limiting movement, limiting basically everything that made being alive enjoyable. The court knew. Everyone was being very careful, except Bora. His court jester, whose name was Bora, had been out in the royal gardens. He came back in a state of tremendous self-satisfaction, clearly having experienced something hilarious and entirely unable to contain it. The king, flat on his back and suffering considerably, asked where he had been. In the next vineyard, your majesty, hanging 3 of your servants. And that pleases you? Enormously. None of them had the legs for it. Now. Martin. I was already in considerable gastrointestinal distress. His constitution, at this particular moment, was not equipped to handle a strong emotional response of any kind. This was not a secret. Everyone in that room understood the situation. The joke hit him anyway. He began to laugh, hard, genuinely, the full-body kind, and found that he could not stop. The laughter, combined with the existing digestive chaos, produced a crisis his physicians could not resolve. They tried. It is worth noting that they tried. Martin I died shortly after, having been finished off by a joke about a triple hanging. There are historians who dispute the finer details. Some suggest he was already so close to death that almost anything would have done it. That is, of course, true, but it entirely misses the point. The point is that the last king of the House of Barcelona, closing out 3 centuries of royal lineage, died laughing at a jester who was proud of himself. The jester reportedly did not face any consequences, which suggests that even the new administration recognized the joke had been objectively excellent. His successor, Ferdinand I, was elected by committee a full 2 years later. The House of Barcelona was done, and somewhere, Bora presumably retired with a story nobody would ever fully believe. There are worse ways to go. There are almost none more absurd. Down the river, Frederick Barbarossa was not the kind of man you expected to die stupidly. Holy Roman Emperor from 1155, one of the most formidable rulers in medieval Europe, he had spent decades building a reputation as a military and political force of genuine consequence. He led multiple campaigns across Italy, managed the fractious German princes with something approaching actual competence, and was regarded widely as the defining imperial authority of his era. When the Third Crusade was called in 1187, Frederick answered immediately. He assembled what may have been the largest crusader army Europe had ever seen. Estimates run to around 100,000 men, and marched east in 1189 with the full weight of the empire behind him. He didn't make it. On June 10th, 1190, the imperial column reached the Salef River in what is now southern Turkey. It was not a dramatic river. It was not the kind of crossing that earns its own chapter in military histories. By all contemporary accounts, it was fairly manageable. Frederick, for reasons that remain genuinely unclear, either attempted to swim across independently, or his horse lost footing mid-current, or he simply fell while crossing in full armor. The sources disagree on the mechanism. They agree entirely on the outcome. Frederick Barbarossa drowned in what was effectively a large stream. I'm going to need a moment. Take your time. He led 100,000 men across Europe. He did. To drown in a river, a horse could walk across. Apparently so. The aftermath was, if possible, worse. His army, having just watched their legendary emperor go under, largely collapsed. Some soldiers turned around and went home. Others attempted to transport the body forward, preserved in vinegar, with the goal of burying Frederick in Jerusalem. The body did not cooperate. Vinegar, it turns out, is not a long-term preservation strategy for an emperor who needs to reach Jerusalem. The remaining forces arrived at Antioch in considerably reduced condition, and what was left of the great crusading army contributed very little to the campaign that followed. Frederick was eventually buried in pieces, across multiple locations, throughout the eastern Mediterranean. No single grave, no Jerusalem burial. The man who planned to liberate the Holy City was distributed across several countries in jars. Official military operations are extremely dangerous, as advertised. The weight of the crown. Bela I of Hungary came to power in 1060 after a period of considerable dynastic violence, which was fairly standard for 11th century European succession. He had fought to secure the throne against his nephew, survived the attempt, and set about establishing himself as a capable and methodical ruler. He reformed the currency, developed Hungary's urban markets, and worked to consolidate royal authority in ways that suggested he understood what governance actually required, rather than just wearing the crown and hoping. Hungary was better governed under Bela than it had been in some time. This is not nothing. This is, in fact, a rare compliment in medieval Hungarian history. He held formal audiences at Szekszárd, receiving nobles, issuing decrees, and performing the ceremonial functions that medieval kingship demanded. On one such occasion in 1063, an official royal audience, the kind of event specifically designed to project stability and legitimate power, something unexpected happened during the proceedings. His throne collapsed. Not as metaphor. The actual structure failed beneath him. The injuries Bela I sustained in the collapse were severe enough that he did not recover. The King of Hungary, who had survived a civil war and multiple assassination attempts, was ultimately done in by furniture. The official royal seat, the most loaded symbol of legitimate authority a medieval king possessed, simply could not hold him. You can see the pattern by now. Not a single king on this list so far has been taken out by anything remotely commensurate with the office. Which brings us to a man who did not merely fail to escape this pattern. He ran directly into it at full gallop, carrying a human skull, calculated word count, an expanded narrative section. Dead weight! Sigurd I of Norway had no business dying the way he did. This was a man who personally organized one of the first Scandinavian crusades, sailed to the Holy Land with 60 Norwegian ships, fought the Moors in Iberia, helped besiege and capture Sidon, and accepted a splinter of the True Cross as a personal gift from the King of Jerusalem. He returned home draped in the kind of glory that gets carved into runestones and recited at dinners for 3 generations. He reigned from 1103. He was called Sigurd the Crusader. That is not the nickname of a man who loses a fight he has already won. He lost a fight he had already won. Sometime around 1110, while riding, the exact circumstances are disputed, though the general shape of events is consistent across sources. Sigurd came across the remains of a recently defeated enemy. The man was dead, which Sigurd had presumably arranged through the standard channels. Wanting a trophy to mark the occasion, Sigurd took the man's severed skull and secured it to his saddle. This was not considered unusual behavior for the era. Medieval victory was physical and demonstrable. You kept score in visible ways. A skull on your saddle was essentially a performance review summary attached to your horse. 5 stars. No surviving complaints. The dead, in this particular arrangement, were purely decorative. Sigurd rode with the confidence of a man who had personally rearranged the regional power structure and felt entitled to display his work. Here is what nobody had flagged. Skulls have teeth. As Sigurd rode, the skull shifted position. One of the dead man's teeth grazed his leg. Not a wound in any meaningful sense, more a catch, a scratch, the kind of minor incidental contact that happens when you are traveling with a human head strapped to your saddle, which is admittedly a niche category of riding hazard. Sigurd looked down. He looked back up. He kept riding. He was a crusader king with holy relics, 60 ships, and the personal endorsement of the King of Jerusalem. A scratch from a dead man did not qualify as a medical event. Your Majesty, we should probably look at that leg. There is nothing to look at. It's from the skull, sire. I am aware of where it is from. I put it there. All the same. The skull is mine. The scratch is mine. We are riding. He did not clean the wound. He did not treat it. He was returning from official royal activities, which we have now established across 6 separate case studies as the most reliably lethal category of event available to medieval royalty. The scratch became an infection. The infection spread with the calm, indifferent efficiency that infections have always applied regardless of the political standing of their host. Sigurd I of Norway, crusader, a decorated victor, recipient of actual pieces of the True Cross, died of sepsis from a graze delivered by a man whose head he had personally removed and secured to his own horse. His son Magnus took the throne. The court knew the cause. Nobody encoded it in the most straightforward terms on any official monument. There is no elegant way to document that your predecessor was defeated by his own saddle trophy. The runestones celebrating the crusade were understandably selective about the ending. Pause and consider the full sequence of events. Sigurd defeats the enemy. Sigurd takes the enemy's skull. Sigurd attaches the skull to his horse and rides home in triumph. The skull's tooth grazes his leg. The graze kills Sigurd. The defeated man won, posthumously, on a delay, using only his teeth. The tactical gap here is significant. Sigurd planned for Vikings, for siege warfare, for Byzantine politics. He did not run a risk assessment on the trophies. There is no military doctrine that covers this scenario. There is no tactical chapter on how to avoid losing to someone you have definitively already beaten. Sigurd the Crusader, who sailed 60 ships to Jerusalem and came back with pieces of the true cross, was finished off by dental work. Official royal activities are extremely dangerous. We have now demonstrated this across 6 monarchs, 3 centuries, and 1 uniquely committed skull. The evidence is, at this point, airtight. Here is what all 6 of these men have in common, and it is not the crowns, or the armies, or the borders they controlled. None of it held. Not in the end. Not against the specific and deeply undignified circumstances that came for each of them. Power is a performance that bodies simply do not honor. Adolf Frederick's heart did not take dietary requests from the Swedish crown. George II's aorta did not make exceptions for military distinction. Frederick Barbarossa's lungs filled with river water the same as anyone's would. A dead man's tooth does not pause to recognize the title of the leg it has scratched. We are all, underneath the ceremony and the crowns and the very large hats, made of the same amount of fragile. The circumstances differ. The material does not. That has been true since the first person put on a crown and discovered it didn't make them bulletproof, or sword-proof, or sepsis-proof, or resistant to pastry. That is, somehow, the most equalizing fact in recorded history. There are more of these. The list is long, the deaths get worse, and history is considerably more undignified than anyone officially responsible for teaching it has been willing to admit out loud. If you want a part 2, say so in the comments, and feel free to specify the category of catastrophe you prefer: culinary, architectural, battlefield, furniture, dental. I have material in every column. A reminder before you go. The MyHeritage link is below. Free 14-day trial, 18 billion records, and a statistically reasonable chance that someone in your direct lineage made a decision this structurally unsound and simply was not famous enough for anyone to document it. They deserve to be found. Probably. Go find out. And while you sit with the image of a celebrated Crusader king being quietly defeated by a dead man's dental work, here are some more videos. I think you'll like this one. I'll see you there.